Hey there, and welcome to another episode of the Virtual CISO podcast. I'm your host, John Berry, and with me, as always, the pepper to my soul, Jeremy Sporn. Hey, Jeremy. How many people did we lose right at that moment?
John, you gotta give the people what they want, and that is,
Which is less of you.
yeah, and more of salt and pepper. Come on.
All right, so what did you think of my conversation with Thomas?
So, very interesting conversation. You guys played that consultant auditor dynamic really well. Kind of tossing him those scenarios on how you would handle leveraging ISO 27001 to meet CMMC requirements, and then letting him, from that auditor's perspective, weigh in on if that would even pass muster.
Yeah, it was a different conversation, and in a weird way, it's an awful lot, like being audited, which is sort of what it felt like.
Yeah, which is not surprising at all. Thomas is a crazy accomplished auditor. He has experience in ISO 9001, 20000, 27001, 2717, NIST 800 171, NIST CSF. I truly believe he will be one of the first auditors to be certified to complete a CMMC certification.
Yeah, he's definitely, we know he's in the list, that's for sure.
Absolutely.
Anything else you'd like to chat about before we get to the conversation?
Yeah, so if you really want that glimpse into what one of your future CMMC audits will be like, this is the show for you. And if you hire BSI to perform your CMMC certification audit, you may even have Thomas or someone he trains to show up at your facility. So this is as real as it gets. Thomas knows his stuff. If you can convince him, you're in really, really good standing.
Yeah, I would agree with that assertion. No further ado, let's get to the show. Thomas, thank you for joining us today. How are you?
I'm doing good today.
I always like to start off simple. Tell us a little bit about who you are and what is it that you do.
Yes, I'm a client manager and auditor with BSI. I've been with BSI for 4.5 years and doing ISO 9001 and ISO 20000 assessments, as well as ISO 27000. I'm also a member of the BSI CMMC team, taking a look at the new DoD CMMC model and figuring out how we can provide services to our clients related to that. I have over 20 years experience implementing management systems with different companies in the Virginia, Washington, D.C., and Maryland area.
So that probably means that you know a bit or two about
Oh, yes.
the defense industry. So you sound
And
like I was going to say, you sound like a great person, and we sound very intelligent for having you on the podcast, right? Because you've got exactly the kind of experience that we want to talk about. This idea of if somebody could somebody leverage ISO 27001 to address their CMMC requirements. So awesome. Thank you for joining the podcast. Looking forward to chatting with you.
great.
Before we get going, we have a tradition. What's your drink of choice? Get to know you a little bit.
Well, it's either bourbon or single malt scotch. Any one of the Glens is good with me.
Okay, so I'm half with you. I am an anti-Scotch person. I'm just not a peat guy, but I'm a huge bourbon guy. So you're in Virginia, if I recall correctly. There are some Virginia-specific bourbons. One of them is actually pretty good. I have a bottle of it on my shelf. I believe it's called John J. Bowman. Have you had that before?
No, I have not, but we do have. I did go to a bourbon tasting session one time, and that was very interesting, and got to go learn beyond Jack Daniels and some of the top shelf stuff.
Yeah. I'm a Knob Creek is my kind of go-to, especially they've got a 25th anniversary. That's ridiculous. So you and I are both ISO 27001 certified lead auditors, and I know I'm a raving fan of 27001. I think you are as well. That being said, you and I often approach it from a different side. Despite the fact I'm a lead auditor, I tend to live on the consultative side of the equation. We're more about building it, where you're more about assessing it. So this is going to be fun to have a conversation with you, because I think we look at things a little bit different. And then I think our clients, mutual clients, of course, they'll get some perspective on the implementation side and also the audit side. So if I asked you from your perspective, how are 27001 and CMMC the same or similar?
All right. So first off, this is ISO 27001. As you know, it helps you to build a great foundation for implementing an information security management system. Helps you to do is to build a program where you can identify your information and put in safeguards and protections to protect those information assets and the information that you run your organization with, um, and protect it in terms of confidentiality, integrity, and availability. CMMC is designed specifically for is safeguarding and controlling controlled unclassified information, the CUI. And this is a result of the fact is that, with the NIST 800-171, companies were doing self-assessment, and they felt that the government felt that wasn't going far enough, that they weren't lacking confidence that the controls were being implemented adequately. So they came up with the CMC model to prescribe specific practices that they want to see implemented to control and safeguard CUI that resides either in your systems or in the federal systems that you may work with.
Gotcha. Yeah, would you agree that, like when I look at it at a really super simplistic level, they both have a significant collection of good security practices that should help you be quote unquote secure, right? In ISO we have the 114 explicit controls in NXA, plus the 70 odd or whatever you would like to call it controls that can be implied from the clauses within the management system. And then within CMMC, if we're talking about level 3, right, we've got 130 controls. So in both cases, we've got a collection of controls that should be implemented, and if we do, we're probably going to end up in a good spot. And then the second thing is that they both have certification programs. So they're both independent, objective auditors come in and certify that the controls have been implemented in accordance with the requirements. Is that fair?
That is correct. And the thing is this, with the ISO 27001, you select those controls based on risk.
Mm-hmm.
While in the CMC model, the practices that you have to implement are based on the level of CMC that you need to achieve that's specified within your contract. So if you are at level 2, you have a set number of practices that you are expected to demonstrate compliance to. If your contract says you need to be at level 3, then you need to do implement all those practices. Basically, is achieve compliance to the NIST 800-171 and the additional control practices that are specified within the CMC model.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I think that comes down to the fundamental difference between NIST FISMA guidance and ISO guidance. With NIST FISMA, ultimately we've got 3 risk levels, right? We've got low, moderate, or high, and we have prescriptive risk treatments or semi-prescriptive risk treatments that are associated with each level. Where ISO, we have an infinite level of risk, right? It's a self-defined level of risk, and then we implement controls based on our acceptance risk criteria.
Yes, that is correct. So then you may do is look through a control and decide that, this may not be applicable to my organization, and then you assume the risk associated with that. With the CMMC model, there is no choice. If you want to achieve that level of certification, you have to implement all the practices that are specified for that level.
Cool. So I think we covered how they're the same. If I ask you the question, how are they different?
Okay. Well, like we said, the ISO 27001 is an international standard, and it's accepted across different countries, while the CMMC is a DoD and sponsored, modeled by the Office of the Undersecretary of Defense Acquisition. The CMC model certification process is a process that's used to rank a company's ability to protect CUI information and data, as well as the infrastructure and system where it resides. While the ISO 27001 is any information that that an organization uses to run its operations or information that belongs to their clients. So in the CMMC model, it's specific to a contract, and it's specific to safeguarding, controlling CUI.
Mm-hmm.
And also the other thing is the CMMC entails determining process maturity levels and the implementation of prescribed practices for each level of the model.
Yeah, I think that's all well said. I mean, I think you cut to the core of it is that, CMMC, while they're very, very similar, CMMC has a specific use case, where ISO is a framework that can be used in any use case. So now that leads us to the next great question. So this idea of, because ISO can be used in any use case, does that mean we can use ISO from a CMMC perspective? So let me ask it this way. If you are getting ISO 27001 certified, or you're considering it, and you know that CMMC is something that you need to achieve, and as you are constructing your ISMS, you're considering the CMMC requirements, as part of your interested parties in your ISMS scope, then from my perspective, I would think that the resultant ISMS should essentially be ready for CMMC certification, assuming we do it right. Thoughts? Goshes? Anything you would look differently as an auditor than I just said?
Well, the thing is remember, ISO 27001 is about putting in place a management system, which by definition requires ownership and involvement of top management to ensure the provision of the resources for planning, implementing, and managing your controls, things that are needed to identify and mitigate risks that might affect the organization's information and information assets. The ISO 27000 certification can provide a foundation for implementing key components and practices of the CMMC. Many of the domains that are in the CMMC model are also within the controls of the ISO 27001. The only exceptions is that there's two areas which are not covered, and that is the there are two areas that are not covered, two domains that are not covered that I remember. But the thing is the ISO 27 controls are less prescriptive, and they do not delve into some of the technical aspects of the securing data that CMMC practices do.
Mm-hmm.
So the thing is the ISO 27001 helps you raise awareness about the need to safeguard and protect information and information assets. It introduces a concept of having risk assessments, and also is implementing controls. But the thing is the CMMC model has more domains, more practices, and more technical practices at that. So the thing is there are things you can do to satisfy the 27,000 requirement, but are not yet enough to satisfy the CMMC practices. You may need more resources and additional technology and tools to satisfy those CMMC requirements.
Gotcha. So I think what you're saying, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that because the CMMC has some more prescriptive guidance, that as long as we're implementing our ISO 27001 controls in consideration of that guidance, which we would, right, if that was something that was documented in our system security plan, it was reflected in our statement of applicability, if it was reflected in our risk assessment, that would mean that we'd ensure that we implement those controls in a way that would conform with CMMC. So if we architect an ISMS with CMMC fully considered, we should end up in a place where we can both be ISO 27001 certified and CMMC certified.
That is correct.
Cool.
And the thing is, like I said earlier, the two domain areas that are not covered that are part of the CMMC model are situational awareness and maintenance. Mm-hmm. Those two domains are not part of the ISO 27000 standard.
Yeah, there's that one, and I don't recall it off the top of my head, but there's one area of ISO, the standardized operating procedures portion, that I think you could make an argument. Part of that, that's sort of those old school run books, and that should cover that maintenance pretty well. But good point, and I think that's a good for anyone that is going to use that approach. I think that's two good things to make sure that we provide some additional coverage to cover well. The other thing here's a good question for you. So I'm curious as to your thought on this, so about what a system security plan, and I believe the NIST standard on is 800-18. How would you compare and contrast a system security plan versus an ISO 27001 ISMS?
Okay. Well, first off, a system security plan is a document that identifies the functions and features of a system, including all the hardware and software that is installed on that system. An SSP is a comprehensive summary of all the security practices and policies that will be used to protect data for a specific contract. And an SSP is often needs to be submitted to the government as a deliverable at contract award. Now, the scope of an information security management system can be designed to assess the risk and implement controls for information belonging both to the organization and all its customers, and not just a specific contract. An ISMS manual, which most people put together when they implement a program, is a plan or internal document that's maintained by the organization, and demonstration of the ISMS conformity is to the conformity to the ISO 27000 standard, and a copy of the certificate may be provided to the government or a prime contractor to demonstrate that you have an information security system in place.
Mm-hmm.
While CMMC requires that you have a third-party assessment and attain that level and a certification for that.
Yeah, what was interesting to me, so when, a couple of years ago when 800-171 started to become, more part of the vernacular in the defense industrial base, I was struggling with this idea of, do we need to develop a really formal, SP 800-18, FedRAMP ATO-ish style system security plan for 171? Because we had a client that was ISO certified, and my argument was that I thought that the documentation in toto, right, met that requirement. And I did reach out to one of the authors of the NIST 800-171, and she confirmed in email that the formality of an 800-18 wouldn't be required, and that an ISO 27001 management system and the documentation produced by it should be sufficient to meet the SSP requirement. It will be interesting to see what CMMC AV, determines in that particular case. So it'll be fun to see.
Yes, the accreditation body is, they need to provide some additional information on this topic. There has been word that's come out from the Defense Acquisition Office that there may be some reciprocity between the CMMC model and other standards such as ISO 27001, the NIST CSF, the cybersecurity framework. And so we're waiting to see what information flows from the accreditation body on that.
Oh, that would be cool. I had not heard that. So now you got me curious. I want to hang up the phone with you, Thomas, and go look at it. But I'm gonna journey on here. So we talked about the idea of ISO. If you were certified, if you were getting certified, and you fully considered CMMC, that we'd end up in a good spot. So now let's talk about another case. So like we've got clients that are already ISO 27001 certified, but at the time that we constructed that, 800-171 or CMMC were not a requirement. So my thought process as a consultant, if I was on the phone with them, is I'd say, you're likely meeting many of the requirements of CMMC, but certainly not all of them. So as an example, if you only need to be L1 or L2, level 1 or level 2, we're probably in pretty good shape. If you need to get, up to 3, 4, and 5, you probably have a pretty fair amount of work to do. Your thoughts as an auditor?
Well, the most important thing is, from an auditor's perspective, is that you need objective evidence. Whether you are doing ISO 27001 or the CMMC, you're going to have to provide objective evidence that you've implemented information, you have documentation, records, or systems that demonstrate compliance to either the ISO 27000 requirement, or in the case of the CMMC, is you have the ability to demonstrate you have implemented those practices. One of the biggest challenges for doing CMMC is that because many of the practices have a technical focus, people may have the tendency to refuse to ignore the administrative side. That is, not having policies for each of the domains, not having plans that specify what is your approach and the resources that you're going to use and apply to ensure that you implement, maintain, monitor, and maintain each of those practices. So for instance, if you say, hey, great, I can show you that I've got the screensavers and all these things, the timing issues resolved, all the technical issues resolved when you walk away from your computer. But if you don't have a documented procedure that specifies, well, hey, make sure that that's implemented and provides the resources for it, you may have a shortfall there.
Gotcha. So let's talk about that. Let's talk through what it would take. So you're ISO certified. Now you're going to layer CMMC in. If I'm just kind of spitballing this, right? From my perspective, the first thing we'd have to do is update our ISMS scope statement to kind of reflect this CUI explicitly in any of the particular interested parties, including CMMC AB and my contractors and people of that nature. Any of the specific systems that are different or that weren't part of that, critical interfaces and boundaries, things of that nature. We might have to update I would want to update the risk assessment to make sure we're looking at that. That risk assessment would probably drive potentially some changes to the statement of applicability. I'd probably want to gap assess the implementation of our controls, versus the more prescriptive requirements of CMMC. And then assuming that all went swimmingly, I'd probably want to validate that it all worked the way that I thought during my ISMS internal audit. If I had done that, and you came in to audit me, thoughts?
I would say that, yes, if you updated your ISMS, your documentation, and you did the risk assessment, that you are on a good footing.
Okay.
But before you do that,
Mm-hmm.
and most important is you need to identify what CUI you have and where it resides in your environment or under your control. You need to review your contracts and work with your contracting officer to identify and understand the CUI requirements and also the CMMC requirements that are for your organization and the contracts that you have. You need to have a good handle on that before you get too far into this documentation, because you need to know, okay, where is it and how big of the impact it is, and then you're going to be able to do is figure out where you're going to need to apply and update your procedures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what you're speaking to is the concept within ISO of scope or context, and ensuring that we're doing a good job of really understanding all of that. And then everything logically flows from there.
Yes, you need to scope the CUI and how the CMMC affects your organization, your systems, and then put together a plan of attack on how you're going to update your SMS and your current controls and practices to meet the CMMC level requirements that are specified within your contract, whether it be a level 1, a level 2, or level 3. And also too is those requirements may change. You may initially have a requirement that you only need to have a level 1 or 2, but later on in the life of the contract, the government may come back and say, you know what, we're increasing the scope of the work, or guess what, we're going to do is pass over more information to you to control, and some of this is going to be CUI, and you're going to need to do is make adjustments. You may have to start off initially with a level 2, but then later on in your contract, you may be expected to rise up to a level 3.
That'll be interesting to see how they're going to handle that. That's an interesting thought.
Yes, contract modifications are a fact of life with working with the government.
I know that. The question is going to be is, so let's say for sake of argument, mid-year, right, they reclassify, you from CMMC level 2 to level 3. Are they going to accept, your environment for that? I wonder how that's going to work. That you're going to be given a pass for the 6 months until, because if you think about it logically, actually, I take that back. So CMMC, as far as what I've heard and understood, is that it's going to be a 3-year certification cycle.
Correct.
And then you're going to have interim reporting, which is necessary to do, which is still to be defined. So if you think about it, how would they do that? I mean, that they would have to pay you for another audit, because you will not be able to, if that happened in 6 months into year 1, you're 2.5 years from your next CMMC audit.
Well, the thing is this, if they change the requirements, like in government contracting, anytime they change the requirements, you need to ask for a modification.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Interesting. I hadn't thought about that. One more interesting thing that we're going to see over the next couple of years. So speaking about this whole audit process and the fact that the CMMC AB, as of the time of this recording, which is May 8th, 2020, that audit program has not yet been published. I'm curious, I know as an auditor, I had an opinion. We actually blogged about it. Any conjecture or thoughts on what you think the level of effort to conduct a typical CMMC level 3 audit will be?
Well, from past experience, we worked with the NIST cybersecurity framework, which is very similar to the CMMC. It's a maturity model, and it also has a large number of practices like the CMMC, and many of those practices are technically oriented. And with a cybersecurity framework assessment, we need at least 3 days to do that.
Mhm.
Likewise, I would think it would be the same thing with the CMMC assessment. Also, it may require additional audit days based on the scope, the size, and the complexity of the organization or the site being assessed. Also, the number of contracts and systems involved may affect the duration. Are we doing a CME assessment on a specific contract or specific contract site, or are we doing a CMC assessment of the entire organization and the collection of contracts it has?
Right. Yeah. And yeah, there's certainly a lot of gotchas, right? I mean, the CUI scope even, right? Because you could have a large organization with a, small CUI scope, or you could have a moderate sized organization with a large CUI scope.
And as you said, we're still waiting guidance from the CMC accreditation body on that.
Yep. Hey, I agree. Quick question for you. When you said that on your 3-day guess, was that 3 days worth of, let's call it, on-site or true audit work with, some preparatory time and some reporting time on the back end, or was that 3 days all in from your perspective?
That's 3 days on site.
I thought so. Okay, cool. So, if you wrap in and, so you're landing and it's probably about 5 days plus worth of work would be a good guess.
Yes.
Yeah. That's exactly my thought as well. To us, it's very similar to, if you look at an ISO audit, the net amount of controls that you're looking at and the net due diligence that you would do there, typically when we scope an audit of that nature, it's 5, 6, 7 days, something like that. So yeah, you and I are right on the same page there. So this has been great. You've really done a good job of answering every question I had. Anything else you specifically think we should address, would like to address?
Okay. Well, the thing is what I would like to say is that any organization that currently has NIST 800-170 requirements, they need to focus on completing their plans of actions and demonstrating compliance to those requirements. You need to demonstrate conformance to those current requirements you have before we start venturing into the CMC journey.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because that's the first thing they're going to ask you. It says, okay, they're going to look at you. Do you have the requirement, but you haven't demonstrated this requirement? How are you going to get to the next level of requirements?
Mm-hmm.
The other thing to consider.
One quick thing there, because I like what you're saying there, and I think that's especially important because CMMC is going to age in over what 5 years, I think it is, through 2025.
Yes.
And then and they've gotten serious. What I've heard, I don't know if you've heard similar, is that the DIBCAC, who is responsible for enforcing 800-171, recently expanded I heard they quadrupled the number of auditors. And my understanding is that if you don't need to be CMMC for a couple of years still, you're still going to need to be provably compliant with 800-171. There's no longer going to be just take a piece of a crayon and write X on a paper and send it to us and we're going to accept it. There's going to be more enforcement. In fact, they've even filed some false claims acts against some organizations that did things like that. So I think that's a really good point that you just brought up.
Right. They're going to be looking at the self-attestments of the companies that have NIST 800 requirements. They're also going to be going back to those companies and say, all right, let's look at the plan of actions that you submitted to us for the shortcomings of your NIST 800-171 compliance, and show us that you've implemented those plans of actions. And if you come up short with that, you're going to be a world of hurt just meeting today's requirements. And the thing is, the CMC is going to be more stringent because the stakes are higher. Because with the 800, if you don't achieve that level and you don't have that level of certification, you may not be able to compete on contracts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
The other thing I want to bring up that's important is that there are mappings that are available and useful tools to help you in figuring out how the CMMC requirements play into other schemes. There's mapping models for ISO 27000 requirements to the NIST 800-171. There's ISO 27000 to the NIST CSF, and there's also mappings of the NIST CSF to the CMMC that are available through the various government sites. And also, is anybody looking for news and updates? Do look at the CMMC accreditation body website for the official information regarding the rollout of the CMC. News is changing all the time. I mean, the things such as questions about, okay, do auditors need to have a security clearance? Well, to find the answer, you need to go there. Also is beware of false claims. No one is a CMMC expert, and no one is licensed to do CMMC third-party assessments. So anybody claiming to be, I'm already a CMC level 3, that's a false statement, because how could they get assessed if nobody has license to do an assessment?
Yeah, that situation is so bad. I don't know if you saw, but Miss Lord, I apologize, I can't remember her first name, Eileen or Ellen or something of that nature, who's at the head of this. If you go
Katie
to their,
Everington?
not Katie, I think it's her boss, the Miss
Uh-huh.
Lord.
Yes.
She actually put blog or on the front page of their site something to this extent, because too many people out there are already advertising CMMC level 3 audits. And I agree with you. No one is a CMMC expert. That's the first thing I say to anybody is that, look, these are all highly educated guesses, but they are still guesses at this point until we have the guidance. And even once we have the guidance, there's no guidance is ever perfect in year 1 or year 2. There's always clarifications, there's always interpretation. So, I mean, I think we're really, 2 or 3 years away from, someone being able to definitively say, I'm an expert, or, any question you can ask me, I know what the answer is, because there's been enough adjudication of it.
Right. And if you're looking to see how your security system measures up, the two best ways to do it is either a NIST cybersecurity framework assessment or doing a CMMC gap analysis with the understanding that you're not receiving certification, and that this in no way is something that's going to demonstrate that you're a level 1, level 3 organization. So it's just something in preparatory to see, well, how do you compare to the requirements? And
Yeah, sorry about that.
and the accreditation body has said, and the acquisition office has said that's acceptable.
Yep. I think the other one that you could make an argument to do would be an 800-171 assessment, because I think, for many organizations, it's going to be a few years before they need to be CMMC specifically. So that 800-171 is something, though, if they already have a DFARS requirement in their contract, they are liable for 800-171. So if you don't know if you did a good job, if you did use crayon or magic marker or signed off on some stuff you're not sure of, then I think a 800-171 gap assessment, would also be a good idea at this point.
An independent assessment is always much better than having a self-assessment for the objectivity. And the thing is this, you may think you have reached this 800-171 compliance, but if you have an independent assessor come in and look at you, you may find out that, you know what, I didn't quite understand the requirements, and you may not fully have reached that compliant level. So maybe it's good to have an outside expert come in, an auditor with that independent view to look at that stuff.
Mm-hmm. I agree completely. All right, one last question. So you deal with a lot of CISOs, and I always like to ask a fun question to finish off. So I'll ask you, what fictional character, or if you prefer a real person, do you think would make either a really good or a really horrible CISO, and why?
The Invisible Man.
Okay, I'll bite.
I see you're laughing, chuckling, but in all sincerity, it's this: you want somebody who's going to be the flag carrier for this. It's going to be is rallying the troops and making sure that everybody understands this is important. The worst thing you want is an invisible man. You don't want the trouble with the invisible man is nobody knows what he or she is doing. There's potentially no accountability. They may do more harm than good, and they may wind up leaving the room at the most inopportune time. That is, I've seen it where just before we're going to be doing an ISO 27000 audit, we'll get a call saying, guess what? Our quality manager, our information security officer left, and we got our assessment next week. What do we do?
Pray? Is that your answer?
Well, we either reschedule or we work with them on how we can get it done.
Yeah, I have to smile because I'm always amazed at the ingenuity and inventiveness of people when I ask that question. All right, so I'm going to ask you one last question. So you talk every day like we do, to different people in the information security and the business side of those companies. Any ideas for any interesting topics for another episode?
I think would be good episodes would be later on is how to engage with the government to get guidance and direction regarding CUI and the CMMC requirements as it applies to specific contract engagements. And the other one was
I could use that one. It's actually quite maddening. I had a crazy question with regards to a client of ours that is a staffing agency. I think you and I talked about this before. A staffing agency, and they were asked for CMMC level 3, accreditation eventually, certification, but yet they have no CUI. And I've reached out to a bunch of people, and no one will go on record to give me an answer. So yes, I would like that podcast episode personally. So I love that one.
Well, the other
I don't
thing
know
is
who to ask
this.
that question to, though.
Well, it's a good point because right now is I'm saying you need to go to your contracting officer, but your contracting officer may not know,
Right.
and he may have to go to another person who is designated as being responsible for implementing the CUI program for the government for that agency.
Hmm.
The DoD is huge, so if you read the DoD instruction that provides guidance on to the government agencies and the contracting officers. There's a lot of responsibility, and a lot of people are designated as being responsible for implementing CUI programs within each agency. And then, of course, do those people actually talk to the contracting officers once they've drafted up and written a contract? So the thing is this, the big question is, you go to your contracting office and say, hey, I got the CMC requirement now, and I need to know what CUI I have. And he says, well, I don't know. I said, well, you didn't specify it in your contract. Well, you need to go back and find out what information you're going to flow down to me. Because according to the DoD instruction, the government has the responsibility for identifying what CUI they're going to flow down to their contractors, or they're going to designate a CUI as being created as a result of executing a contract.
Yeah. Well, it's good to know that I actually gave them the right guidance, because that's what I did. Is I said, look, it doesn't make sense to me. You're going to have to go back to the prime. Now, whether or not the prime's going to know the answer, they're going to have to go back to the original agency that the contract originates out of. I guess we're going to find that out. Any other ideas for a topic before I let you go?
Yes. And the last thing is this, is once we do get some guidance and direction from the accreditation body, is how do we identify and select a licensed CMMC third-party assessment organization? There's going to be a big demand for a large number, and how do you pick a good one? How do you know that that they are in fact licensed by the accreditation body, and that if you do pay for an assessment, that it be accepted by the government when you hand over that copy of that report?
That's actually another good one as well. Not only that, but I mean, even if there's going to be an accreditation process. So in theory, we should know that all organizations, the accreditation body has vetted, validated the orgs. That being said, you and I both know that the quality of the audit is directly related to the quality of the auditor. So it's going to be interesting to me to see, how, not only how do I tell who my 3PAO is, but how do I know whether or not the auditor that they're sending in, is one that knows his stuff. So another excellent idea. Thank you.
Right. And you mentioned about primes and subcontractors.
Mm-hmm.
And what's very important is that there's got to be communication between the primes and the subcontractors. If you're a subcontractor, you need to just communicate with your prime to make sure that, okay, what are the requirements that related to CUI that may be flowing down to you? Are you going to be expected to take action to be able to demonstrate compliance to both the prime and the government? There's this notion that primes are going to have to certify that their subs have their certifications in place. Also, too, is this: if you are a prime, what steps are you taking to make sure that your subcontractors are aware of CUI and the CMMC requirements, and you may even have to dedicate resources to help them, because whenever we go over a government contract, when you sell it, you're not just selling one company. And many times it's a team of companies that are teaming together to deliver services to the government. And if you don't have everybody have the credentials in line, you as a team may fail.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that whole idea. I think there's probably some people who took a deep breath when they thought, CMMC is really not going to impact me for 2, 3, 4, 5 years. That being said, I think that, as you said, these pursuit and capture teams, they're not going to want weak links on the team. So I do think that you're going to see probably a proactive push by a number of entities to either get to a approvable CMMC level 3 or get to approvable 800-171 place, because they're going to want to make sure that they're not getting shut out of these teams. So more good guidance. Thank you.
Right. I've already seen a number of large companies who have communicated to their suppliers that they have a program that's not only for themselves but also for their subcontractors, to help them become aware of CMC requirements and how to handle CUI.
Wow, that's actually great news. All right, so before I say farewell, how can folks get in contact with you and or BSI?
The best way to get a hold of BSI is go through our BSI site, North America. We have is cybersecurity pages. We're providing information about the cybersecurity awareness, our training, as well as our assessment services. And also, too, I'm on LinkedIn. You can look me up on LinkedIn, Thomas Price. And I'm very active in going out on LinkedIn, looking up for information about CMMC and sharing that information. And I'm welcoming anybody who wants to do is have a LinkedIn connection. I'll be more than happy to connect with you.
Awesome. I think I may have to take advantage of this. I don't know that you and I are linked, and if you're posting CMMC stuff, you can save me maybe a little bit of searching. And so, listen, thank you. Genuinely appreciate you taking the time to come on and chat with us about 27001 and CMMC and this brave new world where we're going if you're in the defense industrial base.
Great. You have a good afternoon, too.
All right, thanks. Have a good weekend, all right?